two siblings sat quietly in the plush first-class section of the airplane, hearts fluttering with excitement as their long-awaited journey was about to begin. The cabin buzzed with the soft murmur of boarding passengers, but for Leah Carter, age 16, and her younger brother Noah Carter, 14, it felt like a dream. Leah carefully stowed her modest backpack beneath the seat in front of her, her every movement calm and precise. She glanced over at Noah, who was fiddling with his seatbelt. With a gentle smile, she leaned over and helped him click it into place. Their father had gifted them these seats as a reward for their hard work in school, and the two had never experienced this level of luxury while flying before. Noah pressed his face against the window, marveling at the planes gliding slowly across the runway outside. His eyes sparkled with pure excitement. Leah leaned back, picking up the in-flight magazine, her mind caught between pride in their achievement and the quiet pressure of responsibility. This was their first flight without their parents, and she was determined to make sure everything went smoothly. Passengers continued boarding as a woman moved confidently down the aisle. Her name was Helen Draper, the airline's most senior flight attendant. She was known for her strict professionalism and no-nonsense demeanor. Her uniform was impeccably pressed, her stride crisp, and her gaze sharp. She greeted passengers with short, practiced smiles and an air of complete control. As Helen's eyes landed on Leah and Noah, her expression shifted. Her polite smile faltered, replaced by a slight crease of confusion. She scanned the cabin as if expecting someone else to be seated there. Then, without hesitation, she approached them, suspicion already clouding her judgment. Standing rigid beside Leah's seat, Helen cleared her throat loudly, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm and slightly raised. "Are you certain these are your assigned seats?" Leah looked up, startled but polite. She handed both their boarding passes to the woman with steady hands. "Yes, ma'am," she replied gently. "Seats 1A and 1B." Helen squinted at the tickets, her lips tightening. After a brief pause, she handed them back without a word of thanks. Her posture straightened further as she crossed her arms. "These seats are in the first-class cabin," she said pointedly. "Are your parents accompanying you on this flight?" Leah shook her head, her tone still calm but quiet. "No, we're traveling by ourselves." Helen's eyes narrowed. She planted her hands firmly on her hips, her tone thick with condescension. "There may be a mistake," she said loudly, as if performing for the audience now gathering around them. "First-class tickets are usually reserved for premium passengers. Let me verify this with the manifest." Leah's face flushed. Around her, murmurs rippled through the rows. She could feel eyes on her and Noah, judging, wondering. Noah shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable and unsure of what was happening. Leah reached over and gently squeezed his hand, her own heart pounding. She didn't know what was going on either, but she wanted to protect her brother from the embarrassment taking shape around them. Helen spun on her heel and strode toward the front of the aircraft, leaving the two teens sitting awkwardly in their seats. They sat in silence, tension thick in the air. Leah focused on her breathing, trying to push down the rising anxiety in her chest. Moments later, Helen returned, her face now void of all warmth. She stopped beside them again, and this time spoke louder, her tone clipped and unkind. "There's definitely an error here," she announced for all to hear. "These seats are designated for our premium clientele, and I'm going to have to ask you both to move back to economy. Now." Leah felt her heart drop. Noah looked around nervously, his earlier enthusiasm completely extinguished. Leah mustered her courage, holding up the tickets once again. "But we have the right seats," she said, voice trembling slightly. "Our father booked these tickets for us." Helen barely glanced at the papers this time, shaking her head as though dismissing the idea entirely. "Ticketing errors happen," she snapped, "especially when minors are flying unaccompanied. Your seats are likely in the rear of the aircraft. Please collect your things. You're delaying the boarding process." More whispers floated through the cabin, some people looking away uncomfortably, others shamelessly staring. Leah's face burned with shame. She stood quietly, signaling Noah to follow. They both picked up their belongings in silence, the weight of dozens of eyes following them as they walked down the aisle, back toward the economy cabin. Helen glanced down once more at the tickets, but barely looked before shaking her head. "Tickets can be misprinted, especially when minors are flying alone," she said sharply. "Maybe your father misunderstood the booking. Economy is in the back, and you're holding up the boarding process." Her tone was cold, her voice loud enough for several passengers to overhear. Whispers began to ripple through the cabin. Some passengers turned away awkwardly, while others leaned in curiously, watching the situation unfold like it was a scene in a movie. Leah felt heat flood her face, but she refused to let herself fall apart. Not in front of these strangers, and especially not in front of Noah. She nodded quietly and stood, her movement slow and deliberate, signaling to her brother to follow. Noah grabbed his backpack and got to his feet, confusion etched across his face. The two of them made their way down the narrow aisle, every step heavy with embarrassment. Helen stood to the side, arms crossed, clearly satisfied that she had resolved the issue. Leah's heart thudded painfully in her chest as they moved toward the back of the plane. She kept her head low, blinking away the sting in her eyes. She wouldn't cry. Not here. They found 2 empty seats near the rear of the economy cabin. Leah motioned for Noah to sit, and she slid into the seat beside him. As soon as they buckled in, Noah leaned in and whispered anxiously, "Why did she make us leave? Did we do something wrong?" Leah shook her head gently, giving his hand a soft squeeze. "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't do anything wrong." But her stomach was tight with emotion. She didn't understand it either. All she knew was that they'd been judged, dismissed without cause. Trying to stay composed, Leah pulled out her phone. Her fingers trembled as she typed out a message to their father. "Dad, something bad happened. They made us leave first class. The flight attendant didn't believe our tickets were real. We're in economy now." She hit send, unsure what to expect next. But what she couldn't know was that this single message was about to set everything in motion. Meanwhile, at the front of the plane, Helen resumed her duties as if nothing had happened. She moved with practiced grace, smiling at passengers, checking overhead bins, and avoiding any mention of what had occurred. To the casual observer, it seemed like a minor hiccup had been handled and forgotten. A few passengers cast uneasy glances toward the back, but most buried themselves in their phones or flipped through magazines. Helen, however, felt completely confident in her judgment. In her mind, she'd done the right thing. She'd enforced order and maintained the integrity of first class. After all, she'd worked for the airline for over a decade. She knew who belonged where. Back in economy, Leah tried her best to distract Noah. She pulled up some funny animal videos on her phone, handing it to him with a soft smile. He chuckled quietly, and she felt a small pang of relief, but inside, her heart still ached. Then, suddenly, her phone buzzed. She picked it up quickly. It was a message from her father. "Tell me exactly what happened. Who made you move seats?" Leah swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. She typed back immediately, giving a brief but clear explanation of everything: the disbelief, the public humiliation, the forced relocation. His response came almost instantly. "Stay calm. I'll take care of this right away." She exhaled slowly, unsure what he meant, but trusting him completely. Their dad didn't get angry easily, but when he did, he always acted with purpose. Next to her, Noah looked over, concerned. "Is Dad mad?" he asked softly. Leah gave him a gentle smile, brushing a hand over his shoulder. "No, he's going to fix it. Just relax, okay? Let's try to enjoy the rest of the flight." Noah nodded, slowly settling back in his seat, but the sparkle from earlier was gone. Up front, Helen poured herself a cup of coffee, satisfied with how smoothly everything was running. Just then, Emily, a younger flight attendant who had witnessed the interaction earlier, approached hesitantly. "Helen," she said gently, "are you sure those kids didn't belong in first class?" Helen rolled her eyes and took a sip from her cup. "Come on, Emily. You've worked enough flights to recognize when something feels off. Those two clearly didn't fit the profile." Her voice was confident, even dismissive. She had no idea that those words were about to unravel her entire day. Suddenly, the phone from the cockpit rang sharply. Helen set her coffee down and answered, her tone crisp and professional. "This is Helen." The captain's voice on the other end was calm, but firmer than usual. "Helen, we've just received a call from Airline management. There's been a serious complaint. We need you in the cockpit immediately." Helen's stomach dropped. She straightened her uniform instinctively and began walking briskly down the aisle, passengers glancing up curiously as she passed. What she didn't realize yet was that her carefully controlled world was about to come crashing down. Helen walked briskly toward the cockpit, her polished shoes clicking sharply against the aisle floor. A tightness gripped her chest, one she couldn't quite explain. She smoothed her uniform, forced a composed expression, and stepped through the cockpit door, completely unaware that the world she so carefully controlled was moments from collapse. Inside, the captain sat quietly, his face serious and unreadable. Next to him, the first officer focused intently on the controls, avoiding eye contact. Helen's eyes shifted to a small screen mounted near the captain's side. A live video call was already underway, connecting them to the airline's main corporate office. On the screen appeared the stern, stone-faced image of an executive, Mr. Everett, the airline's chief operations officer. His gaze was icy, and he said nothing at first, simply studying Helen with silent intensity. The captain finally broke the silence. "Helen," he said calmly but firmly, "we just received a direct call from Mr. Carter, the airline's CEO. He's extremely concerned about a serious incident on this flight." The moment the name left his mouth, Helen's heart dropped. Her breath caught, and a jolt of dread pulsed through her chest. "Mr. Carter?" Before she could respond, the man on the screen spoke up, his voice clipped and cold. "Ms. Draper," Mr. Everett began, "can you explain why two young passengers were removed from their first-class seats without proper verification of their boarding passes?" Helen swallowed hard, her face flushing red. She fumbled for words. "Sir, there was a misunderstanding," she said quickly. "Their tickets looked unusual. I was following protocol." Mr. Everett's eyes narrowed. "A misunderstanding?" he repeated, then leaned slightly toward the camera. Those two passengers are Leah and Noah Carter, the children of Mr. Carter himself. They were traveling with legitimate first-class tickets, booked directly by their father. Each word struck Helen like a hammer. Her mouth went dry. The room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. She glanced at the captain, who watched her silently, his eyes filled with quiet disappointment. Helen stumbled over her next words. I didn't realize. They didn't look like typical first-class passengers. It wasn't intentional. Mr. Everett's expression hardened further. We judge passengers by their tickets, Miss Draper. Not by how they look, he said coldly. Mr. Carter expects immediate action. You are to issue a formal apology to his children, now, and escort them back to their original seats in first class. Further disciplinary action will be addressed after landing. Helen felt the cabin spinning. Her confidence shattered like glass beneath her feet. For years, she had built a reputation for order, precision, and professionalism. In mere minutes, it was crumbling around her. She nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." "I understand," she whispered, barely able to speak. As she exited the cockpit, every step down the aisle felt like walking through quicksand. The proud, in control Helen Draper was gone. All that remained was a woman humiliated by her own assumptions. Passengers glanced at her as she passed, their expressions curious, cautious, sensing something had shifted. At the back of the plane, Leah and Noah sat quietly, both pretending to watch something on Leah's phone. Noah was more relaxed now, chuckling softly at a video clip, but Leah could still feel the weight of what had happened earlier pressing against her chest. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw Helen approaching. Her posture was slower now, her steps hesitant. Leah turned to face her fully, her expression composed but unreadable. Helen stopped in front of their row. She took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremble in her voice. "Miss Carter." "Master Carter," she said, her voice softer than before. "I made a serious mistake. There was no issue with your tickets, and I sincerely apologize for how I treated you. May I please escort you back to your original seats in first class?" The words hung heavily in the air. Leah studied Helen's face, noting the redness in her cheeks, the unease in her eyes. This wasn't the woman who had ordered them to move earlier. Something had changed. Noah looked up at his sister, unsure. He didn't say anything he didn't need to. He was waiting for her lead. Leah didn't respond right away. She met Helen's gaze, holding it steadily, and then spoke, her voice calm but firm. "You seemed very sure we didn't belong up there," she said. "Can you tell me why?" Helen felt her cheeks burning. Around her, passengers had stopped pretending not to listen. Some leaned in, others froze in awkward silence. The tension was thick, and she felt exposed under the collective gaze of strangers. "I made a judgment, based on appearance," she admitted softly, each word laced with shame. Her voice was barely audible, but everyone nearby seemed to hear it. Leah gave a small nod, not out of forgiveness, at least not yet, but as acknowledgement of Helen's honesty. There was no satisfaction in watching the woman squirm, just a quiet, heavy understanding of the truth. Without another word, Leah gently stood, helping Noah gather his things. He looked up at her, confused but trusting. The two of them moved quietly into the aisle, waiting for Helen to lead the way. The walk back up the plane felt like a slow march through a courtroom. Helen led the way, each step dragging like lead. Every face they passed seemed to be watching, whispering, judging. She felt smaller with every footstep, her authority gone, replaced by silent disgrace. As they re-entered the first-class cabin, several passengers looked up, some in shock, others with clear recognition on their faces. Whispers surged through the rows again, louder this time. But Leah and Noah simply returned to their seats with calm grace, settling in without making a scene. Their quiet dignity said everything. Helen stood awkwardly beside them for a moment, trying to find a trace of her former composure. "If there's anything else you need during the flight, please let me know," she said, her voice weak and unsteady. Leah looked at her again. No malice in her eyes, just firm resolve. "Thank you," she replied gently, then turned to Noah, wrapping a comforting arm around him. The message was clear. Their interaction was over. Helen nodded stiffly and turned away, practically fleeing toward the galley. She wanted nothing more than to disappear. Back in their seats, Leah leaned into Noah, rubbing his back gently. "Everything's okay now," she whispered. "Dad knows. He's already handling it." Noah nodded slowly, still shaken, but comforted by his sister's calm presence. He looked out the window, trying to recapture the excitement he'd felt earlier. Leah, too, stared out at the clouds, though her thoughts were far from peaceful. On the outside, she looked composed. Inside, she was still unraveling. The humiliation, the injustice. It wasn't something that would fade easily. Meanwhile, in the galley, Helen stood with her back to the aisle, pouring another cup of coffee. Her hands trembled so badly the liquid nearly spilled. Her composure was in pieces. Nearby, Emily observed quietly. She had seen Helen's downfall unfold step by step, and now, seeing the woman so visibly shaken, she stepped closer. "Are you okay?" Emily asked softly. Helen turned sharply, her expression a mix of frustration and self-loathing. "Do I look okay, Emily?" she snapped. "I just humiliated myself, because I didn't stop to think." Her voice cracked with regret. Emily took a small step back, but she didn't retreat. "I didn't mean to upset you," she said gently, "but maybe now you understand how much a wrong assumption can hurt someone." Helen froze. The words hit her harder than expected, gentle yet piercing. Something shifted inside her. Maybe this wasn't the first time she had made a judgment like this. Maybe it was just the first time someone called her out. She turned away, unable to speak. Her usual confidence, the thing she'd worn like armor for years, had crumbled. What replaced it was a deep, unfamiliar sense of shame and fear. Suddenly, the intercom chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing soon," the captain's calm voice echoed. "Please fasten your seat belts and ensure all tray tables are stowed." Helen straightened her uniform mechanically, forcing her expression into something professional. But her thoughts were far from orderly. She knew this wasn't over. She had spent over a decade building her reputation, mastering every detail of the cabin, and now it all felt fragile. She wasn't sure what awaited her once the wheels touched the runway, but she had a sinking feeling the consequences would be far greater than she'd imagined. Up front, Leah's phone buzzed again. It was another message from her father. "I'll be waiting when you land. Everything will be all right. I'm proud of how you handled this." She stared at the screen, her heart softening. Her father's words, calm and steady as always, wrapped around her like a shield. She looked at Noah, his posture more relaxed now, his eyes brighter than before, and gave his hand a squeeze. They were safe. They were believed. And soon the world would know what really happened. Leah read her father's message again, her fingers tightening around the phone as his words settled gently into her heart. I'll be waiting when you land. Everything will be all right. I'm proud of how you've handled this." A wave of calm washed over her. Even from miles away, her father's steady presence could ground her. She glanced at Noah, who was staring out the window now, the spark slowly returning to his eyes. The sting of humiliation hadn't disappeared, but it was fading, softened by the quiet excitement of nearing their destination. Leah reached over and gently squeezed his hand. They didn't speak, but he gave her a small nod, his shoulders relaxing just a little. At the front of the cabin, Helen moved stiffly through the final pre-landing checks. Her hands went through the motions, but her mind was elsewhere. She avoided making eye contact with passengers. She could feel their stares. Even when they looked away, she knew they were watching, judging. Her safe, predictable world, one she'd proudly managed for years, now felt like it was made of glass, cracking under the weight of her mistake. She didn't know exactly what was coming, only that it would be serious. As the wheels gently touched the runway, the entire cabin seemed to fall into an eerie stillness. Bags stayed tucked, conversations hushed. Everyone was waiting. The plane rolled to a quiet stop at the gate. Passengers slowly reached for their belongings, but the moment the seatbelt sign went off, the intercom crackled again, this time with a tone noticeably firmer than before. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice rang out, "please remain seated for just a moment. We have a brief matter to attend to before disembarkation." Confused murmurs spread through the cabin. Passengers looked around, unsure what was happening. Then the aircraft door opened. 2 airline security officers stepped on board, moving with quiet authority. The cabin fell silent. Helen's breath caught in her throat. One of the officers approached her directly, speaking in a calm but unmistakably firm tone. "Ms. Draper, please come with us. Airline management needs to speak with you immediately regarding your conduct during this flight." A collective gasp rippled across the rows. Helen froze, her face flushed with humiliation. For a moment, she stood there, unmoving, hoping this might somehow still be a dream. But there was no way out. She nodded silently. As the officers escorted her down the aisle, she passed Leah and Noah. Unable to help herself, Helen glanced at them. Leah met her gaze, calm, steady, unreadable, not angry, not cruel, just watching. Noah didn't look up. He stared down at his lap, lips pressed together, still carrying the quiet weight of what had happened. Helen's embarrassment deepened. She continued down the aisle, every pair of eyes following her. It felt like walking through fire. Once she stepped off the plane, the atmosphere inside the cabin shifted, but it didn't lift. The air still felt heavy. The captain's voice returned over the speakers, this time gentler. "Thank you for your patience. You may now safely exit the aircraft." Passengers moved slowly. A few offered sympathetic glances toward Leah and Noah. Others whispered quietly to one another, still trying to process what they'd just witnessed. The siblings waited until the crowd had mostly cleared before gathering their things. Leah walked with quiet poise, her shoulders square. Beside her, Noah clutched her hand tightly, his small face serious and uncertain. As they stepped into the terminal, Leah's heart leapt. Their father was already there. David Carter stood just beyond the gate, his presence strong and composed, yet warm. The moment he saw them, his eyes softened. He moved quickly toward them, pulling both children into a firm, protective embrace. "Are you both all right?" he asked gently, his voice thick with concern. Leah nodded, the tension in her chest easing for the first time in hours. "We're okay now," she said quietly, but it was hard. David nodded, understanding more than her words could express. "I'm proud of how brave you both were," he said, his voice both soft and strong. "No one deserves to be treated like that." Then he turned slightly, eyes settling on a group of airline executives and security personnel standing nearby, clearly waiting for him. His voice, when he spoke again, was calm, but unmistakably firm. "This isn't just about my children. It's about how every passenger is treated. I expect this to be addressed immediately, with full accountability." The executives nodded respectfully, aware of the gravity of the moment. As David guided Leah and Noah gently through the terminal, the crowd parted instinctively. There was a different energy now, not of shame or fear, but of quiet power. Leah leaned into her father's side, finally letting the full comfort of his presence settle around her like a warm blanket. "We're fine now, Dad. It was just really hard," she whispered. David Carter nodded slowly, arms wrapped around both children. His tone remained gentle, but there was a quiet fire behind his words. "I'm proud of how brave you both were today," he said. "What happened to you wasn't just wrong. It was unacceptable. No one deserves to be treated like that." Then, with calm authority, he turned his attention to a group of airline executives and security officers who stood nearby. They were waiting, clearly aware that this was far from over. "I need this addressed immediately," David said firmly. "This isn't just about my kids. It's about every passenger. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity every time they board a flight." The executives nodded solemnly, the weight of the moment pressing in. With one protective arm around each of his children, David guided them through the terminal, each step filled with clarity and purpose. The pain of the experience still lingered, but Leah could feel it. Something bigger was happening, something that might spark real change. And for the first time that day, she felt hope, not just for herself and Noah, but for others too. But while the worst seemed to be over for the Carter family, Helen Draper's reckoning had only just begun. Flanked by 2 airline security officers, Helen moved through the airport in stunned silence. The brightness of the terminal felt harsh now. Overhead, announcements and footsteps became a blur of sound. Eyes followed her, some curious, some pitying, others filled with judgment. Every whisper, every sideways glance felt sharper than the last. For years, she had walked these halls with confidence and respect. But today, all she could feel was shame. The officers led her down a quiet hallway, far from the noise of the terminal. A plaque on a door read simply, "Executive Conference Room." Inside, 3 senior executives waited, their expressions grim. Helen stepped in slowly, her pulse pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. She was invited to sit, firmly but politely, at the far end of a long glass table. Across from her sat Rebecca Morris, a sharp-eyed woman known throughout the airline for her fairness, but also for her uncompromising standards. Beside her was Jonathan Reed, another senior executive whose calm voice often disguised the seriousness of what he carried. They didn't waste time. "Helen," Rebecca began, her tone calm but resolute, "you need to understand the gravity of what happened today. You publicly humiliated 2 young passengers based on assumptions about their appearance. That decision did not just harm those children. It undermined our airline's values and reputation." Her words landed like stones in Helen's chest. She swallowed hard, trying to stay composed. "I understand, Ms. Morris. I didn't mean to cause harm. I thought I was following protocol, but I see now that I made a serious mistake." Her voice was unsteady but sincere. Rebecca didn't flinch. "Our policies are clear. If there's ever confusion about a passenger's seat, the proper course is to verify their tickets privately and calmly with ground staff. You chose to act publicly and harshly." Jonathan leaned forward now, his expression thoughtful but firm. "This incident has forced us to confront a larger issue, Helen," he said. "How some of our staff may treat passengers, not based on ticketing or behavior, but on unconscious biases." He let that sink in before continuing. "We've already received messages from passengers who witnessed the incident. Many are questioning whether this reflects how our airline operates as a whole." Helen's stomach twisted. Her eyes welled up, but she blinked back the tears. It was one thing to realize you'd hurt someone. It was another to know it might define your legacy. "I regret what I did," she said softly. "I can't take it back, but I want to make it right." Helen sat in silence, her voice barely above a whisper as she delivered the words she hadn't wanted to say, but knew were necessary. "I deeply regret my actions. I know I can't undo the harm I caused, but I offer my sincere apology," she said, her voice cracking slightly. There was a long pause. Rebecca Morris exhaled slowly, disappointment still evident in her expression. Yet she acknowledged the sincerity behind Helen's words. After a beat of silence, Rebecca spoke again, her voice softer but steady. "Helen, given the seriousness of this incident, we must act immediately. Effective now, you are suspended from all duties pending a formal disciplinary review." Helen's breath caught. "During this suspension, you will receive no pay," Rebecca continued, "and you are prohibited from entering any airline property or engaging in any professional duties. The committee will determine next steps after a full review of today's events." There was no gray area in her tone. The message was clear. Helen's future was no longer in her hands. Helen felt the floor shift beneath her. She had expected consequences. But this? The weight of it settled over her shoulders like a boulder. Still, she held herself upright. "I understand and accept your decision," she replied, voice trembling but composed. Jonathan Reed nodded with a trace of sympathy, though firm in his agreement. "We encourage you to reflect deeply on this. You've been given a chance, if you choose to grow from it." Helen nodded silently. The meeting was over. She stood, legs unsteady beneath her, and followed the security officers out of the room. The hallway felt longer now, colder. Her confidence, once so deeply ingrained in her identity, felt distant and unfamiliar. Outside the terminal, the late afternoon breeze hit her face, sharp and sobering. The airport had always felt like home to her, but now it was a place that no longer welcomed her. She realized then that her mistake wasn't just about her job, it was about confronting a truth she had ignored for years. And though it hurt, she knew. This was the moment she had to begin facing herself. Meanwhile, in a quiet private lounge within the airport, Leah sat beside Noah and their father. The space was peaceful, far from the crowd, filled with soft lighting and calming music. But inside, Leah's heart hadn't settled. She watched as Noah ate a few snacks from a small tray, clearly more at ease now that their father was with them. But she still felt unsettled. David, sensing his daughter's worry, gently placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Are you feeling a little better?" he asked softly. Leah hesitated, then nodded, though her eyes revealed something deeper. "I think so, Dad," she said, "but it still hurts." I just don't get it. Why did she treat us like we'd done something wrong?" She didn't even try to listen. Her voice was steady but laced with sadness. David leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," he said gently, "people judge quickly without knowing the facts. It's unfair. And it's wrong. But sadly, it happens more often than we want to believe." Leah listened carefully as her father continued, his words deliberate and honest. "She made a judgment about you and Noah, based only on what she saw. She assumed you didn't belong in the first class, and that was her mistake, not yours." Noah, still holding a half-eaten cookie, looked up slowly. "But why would someone think like that?" he asked softly, confusion still in his eyes. David sighed, his voice growing quiet but strong, because sometimes people carry biases they don't even realize. Maybe she had a picture in her mind of who's supposed to sit in first class, and when you didn't match it, she reacted unfairly. David's voice remained calm and deliberate as he continued speaking to his children. "Some people have an idea in their mind of who belongs in places like first class," he said gently, "and when someone doesn't match that idea, they react unfairly. But it's not about you. It's about something inside them they haven't dealt with." Leah sat quietly, reflecting on his words. They felt heavy, but also enlightening. She looked up at her father, her voice soft but sincere. "Does this happen to other people too?" David nodded solemnly. "Yes, sweetheart. Unfortunately, it happens more than we realize. That's why speaking up is so important. When we call it out, we're not just standing up for ourselves. We're standing up for everyone who doesn't have someone to speak for them." Noah listened closely now, his small hands resting still in his lap. David looked between the two of them, his voice growing stronger but filled with warmth and pride. "I want you to know something very important," he said. "You both handled this with courage and dignity. That matters. What happened today gives us an opportunity to make real changes, not just at the airline, but in how we treat people everywhere. Difficult experiences like this, they teach us things. They make us stronger." Leah took a deep breath, her shoulders loosening slightly. She felt something shift, an understanding she hadn't had before. What happened to them wasn't just about a single flight. It was part of something much bigger. Then, almost hesitantly, she asked, "Dad, will the flight attendant be okay?" Her father paused, surprised but moved by her compassion. "She'll face consequences, Leah. What she did was wrong. But this might also be her chance to learn, to grow, just like it's a chance for all of us to be better." He reached out and gently squeezed her shoulder. "People can change," he said softly, "if they're willing to face their mistakes honestly." Leah nodded slowly, her heart a little steadier. Noah gave a small smile too, reassured by their father's quiet strength. David stood, reaching for his bag. "Come on," he said warmly. "Let's go home." Together, they walked through the lounge and into the bustling airport terminal once more. But this time, Leah noticed something different. Staff members looked at them not with suspicion or judgment, but with understanding, even sympathy. A few nodded respectfully. Others offered warm smiles. It reminded her that not everyone was like Helen. Many people did understand fairness. Many still believed in compassion. She held her head a little higher. What they had gone through, maybe it really could help make something better. As they walked toward the exit, Leah turned for one last look at the terminal behind them. She realized something had shifted, not just in her, but maybe in others too. Sometimes, she thought, the most painful experiences carry the seeds of real change. That evening, Helen Draper sat alone in her apartment. The lights were off. Only the glow of the city beyond her window gave shape to the room. Her uniform lay folded on the couch, a symbol of a career she had once worn with pride. Now, it felt like a weight, a reminder of everything she had lost, and everything she still didn't fully understand. The day replayed in her mind, over and over again. Leah's steady gaze, the firm voice of the executive, the walk down the aisle as passengers watched in stunned silence. She could still feel the heat of shame rising in her cheeks. Helen had always taken pride in being composed, in being efficient, in being right. But today, she had been wrong. Her hands trembled as she reached for a cup of tea, untouched and now cold. The silence in her apartment was almost unbearable. No checklist could fix this. No routine could restore her certainty. She stared blankly at the uniform. Who was she now? Not just as a flight attendant, but as a person. For the first time in years, Helen felt truly small, vulnerable, and, more than anything, lost. Helen sat in the dim light of her apartment, laptop balanced on her knees, the silence pressing in like a weight. She had put off checking her email all day, afraid of what she'd find. But now there was no avoiding it. With a shaky breath, she opened her inbox. Dozens of unread messages stared back at her, some from colleagues, others from airline management. Her stomach twisted. She clicked on the most recent one, its subject line unmistakable. Formal disciplinary notification. Immediate suspension confirmed. Her eyes scanned the lines slowly, each word tightening the knot in her chest. The language was firm, clear, unforgiving. Your future with the airline will depend heavily on your cooperation and the outcome of the formal disciplinary hearing scheduled for next week. Helen set the laptop aside, her arms resting limp on her lap. She felt hollow. Her mind wandered back through the years. Flights she had once taken pride in. Situations she'd handled with grace. But now she remembered other moments too. Times when she had judged too quickly. Times she had dismissed someone without thinking. Had she always carried this bias, tucked away behind procedure and policy? The thought made her stomach churn. She let her mind return to the Carter children, Leah and Noah. She pictured how confident she had been when confronting them, how certain she was that they didn't belong. She'd seen 2 kids and had drawn her conclusion instantly. They don't look like first-class passengers. The realization hit harder than she expected. She had stripped them of dignity. And now she couldn't strip that moment from herself. Restless, Helen stood and slowly paced around her small living room. Her eyes landed on a photo shelf. One frame in particular caught her attention. A picture of her as a child, maybe 8 or 9, beaming with wide-eyed joy and innocence. She stared at it. That little girl had once believed in kindness. She had once led with heart. Where had that gone? Somewhere along the way, professionalism had hardened into pride. Policy had blurred into prejudice. And now, she was paying the price. Helen returned to her desk and sat down. Slowly, deliberately, she opened a new email draft. She didn't know if they would read it, but she had to write it. Not for them, but because it was the right thing to do. She addressed it to Mr. Carter and to Leah and Noah. Subject: my deepest apology. Dear Mr. Carter, Leah, and Noah, I want to express my deepest and most sincere apology for my actions on today's flight. I made assumptions about you based on appearance rather than fact, and in doing so, I caused you pain and humiliation you did not deserve. What I did was unacceptable. This experience has forced me to confront my own biases in a way I never have before. I cannot undo what happened, but I can promise to learn from it. I will never allow myself to make such a harmful assumption again. I fully accept any consequences and will cooperate completely with the disciplinary committee. I only hope that one day you might find it in your hearts to forgive me. Regardless of whether you do or not, I want you to know how truly sorry I am. Helen Draper. Helen read the email 3 times before finally pressing send. The moment it disappeared from the screen, she leaned back, exhaling a shaky breath. She didn't feel fixed. She didn't feel redeemed. But for the first time since the flight, she felt lighter. It wasn't closure. It was a beginning. A long, difficult road lay ahead. She might lose her career. She might lose the trust of the people she once led. But now, finally, Helen understood. Real change starts with truth, and truth begins by facing yourself. Helen stood quietly by her apartment window, the city lights stretching endlessly below. For the first time in days, her chest no longer felt like it was caving in. The storm inside had not vanished, but it had changed. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the start of something harder, something necessary. She had come to see that what happened on that flight wasn't just about one bad judgment. It was about patterns, assumptions, blind spots she had carried for years without ever pausing to examine them. And now, she finally was. She realized that this painful chapter didn't have to define her. It could refine her, not as punishment, as transformation. She placed a hand on the glass, breathing deeply as a new clarity began to take hold. This journey would be long. It would be uncomfortable. But, for the first time, Helen was ready to face it, fully. The next morning, sunlight drifted softly into Leah's room, painting the walls with golden hues. But the warmth didn't quite reach her heart. She had barely slept. Her thoughts had been too loud. She slipped downstairs and found her father already at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, his face deep in thought. He looked up as she entered, offering a quiet, comforting smile. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said gently, motioning for her to sit. Leah pulled out a chair beside him, drawing closer. Not just physically, but emotionally too. She needed to be near him today, to feel safe. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the soft ticking of the wall clock. Then Leah finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "Dad, I couldn't sleep much. I just kept thinking about what happened, about how people judge so fast," she said. "It's like they don't even see the real person." David listened closely, setting his coffee down as he turned toward her. "You're right," he said. "People do judge quickly. Sometimes it's because of fear. Sometimes it's just habits they've never challenged. Assumptions passed down, never questioned." Leah nodded slowly, her thoughts churning. "It just hurt so much," she admitted, her voice trembling. "It hurt Noah, and it hurt me. Flying first class was supposed to be exciting, something special, but now it just feels tainted." Her voice faded, the sadness in her eyes unmistakable. David gently reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His grip was warm, grounding. "I know it hurt, and I'm so sorry you both went through that. But I want you to remember, what happened wasn't because you did anything wrong. It happened because someone else had a bias they didn't even fully see in themselves." Leah held his gaze, her eyes watering, not from weakness but from release. "I just keep wondering," she said softly. "Do you think Helen's really sorry? Do you think she'll actually change?" David paused for a long moment, thinking carefully. "I believe people can change," he said slowly, "but they have to want to. Really want to. Helen sent us an apology last night. It felt sincere. She admitted she was wrong." He took a breath before continuing. "But real change isn't just words. It's action. It's time. It's consistency. Only she can decide if she's willing to do the work." Leah looked down, nodding gently. She understood what he meant. Her heart was still guarded, but a small part of her, the hopeful part, wanted to believe change was possible, even for someone like Helen. Leah's voice was soft but unwavering. "I think maybe she can learn, Dad. If we stop believing people can change, then things will always stay the same. It just feels better to believe in hope, even when someone's hurt you." She surprised even herself with the words, but they felt right, deeply right. David looked at his daughter, eyes filled with warmth and pride. "You're exactly right, Leah. Believing in hope and giving people a chance, that's brave, and it's the only way we'll ever see real change." Just then, Noah wandered into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning," he mumbled, still groggy and unaware of the conversation he'd just walked in on. Leah immediately stood and moved to his side, gently guiding him to the table. He sat down slowly, his shoulders tense. David leaned in with a reassuring smile. "How are you feeling, buddy? Did you sleep okay?" Noah shrugged a little, looking toward Leah. "I had some weird dreams. About yesterday." David nodded knowingly. "That makes sense. Sometimes tough experiences stick with us. But you're safe now, and I'm right here. We'll get through this together." Noah's expression eased, his body relaxing at last. After breakfast, while Leah and Noah sat quietly nearby, David scrolled through his phone, his face serious, his mind clearly at work. Leah noticed. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice gentle but curious. David looked up and met her gaze. "Today, I'm meeting with the airline executives. We're putting new systems in place, training for all staff on fairness, respect, and recognizing unconscious bias." Leah nodded slowly, her heart lifting just a bit. "We're making sure this never happens again. Not just because it happened to you two, but because it could happen to anyone. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Everyone." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And today," he said with conviction, "we begin holding our airline to that standard." Leah smiled softly. It was the first real smile since everything had happened. "I'm glad something good is coming from it," she said. David smiled back. "That's how change works. It's never easy, but it matters." For a moment, they sat in quiet understanding, Leah, Noah, and their father, bound not just by love, but by purpose. They weren't just healing, they were standing up, for themselves, for others. Leah realized something vital. Strength wasn't about being untouched by pain. It was about rising through it, carrying compassion and courage with every step forward. That same morning, Helen Draper stood alone outside the glass doors of the airline's towering headquarters. She had entered this building countless times before, confident, put together, sure of her place. But today was different. The towering structure now looked intimidating. The familiar lobby suddenly felt distant, cold. Today wasn't about routine. It was about reckoning. Dressed neatly in civilian clothes, Helen clutched a small notebook in her hand, filled with reflections she'd written the night before. She took one last deep breath, the kind you take before jumping into unknown waters, then stepped inside. Her heart pounded with anxiety, but woven inside it was something new: resolve. Helen sat tall in her chair, hands folded, trying to control the quiet storm of nerves inside her. Across the polished table, Rebecca Morris addressed her again with a calm, measured voice. "Helen, we've reviewed your apology letter and the statement you submitted," she said. Both were sincere and reflective. But today's decision isn't just about intent. It's about accountability. She paused, her gaze steady. Your career record has been strong. However, this incident was extremely serious. It challenged the very values this airline claims to uphold. Helen nodded slowly, fully absorbing the weight of the moment. Across from her, Jonathan Reed leaned forward, adding his voice to the decision. This wasn't just an isolated error. It forced us to confront hard truths about bias and how our staff interacts with passengers. And because of your actions, we've had to reassess how seriously we train and enforce those values. Helen's throat tightened. She didn't argue. She didn't excuse. "I understand," she said softly. "I've seen how deeply my actions affected those children and the trust others place in our airline. I take full responsibility, and I accept any consequences you decide." A long silence followed. Then Rebecca nodded, as if coming to a final decision. "Because of your honesty, your long-standing service, and your visible willingness to grow, we are offering you a path forward," she said. "Effective immediately, your suspension will continue for 3 months without pay." Helen's heart clenched, but she stayed still. During this time, Rebecca continued, "You will be required to complete a full sensitivity and anti-bias training program. You'll also participate in community outreach, real, face-to-face work with people who've experienced discrimination. This is not just for our image, it's for you." Jonathan added, "Only after the training and outreach are completed will your role be reevaluated. Reinstatement is not guaranteed. It will depend entirely on your growth and accountability." Helen took a deep breath. "I accept all of it," she said, her voice firm. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity to learn and to prove I can be better." Rebecca offered a slight nod. "We hope you do." The meeting ended with formality, but not coldness. As Helen exited the room, her heart felt heavier, but not hopeless. She had been given a second chance, and this time she intended to earn it, not with words but with action. The meeting had ended, but Helen Draper's journey was just beginning. She stepped out of the airline's headquarters into the sunlight, eyes adjusting to the brightness that somehow felt new. For a brief moment, she paused, letting the warmth of the day settle over her. This wasn't a happy ending. It wasn't a redemption arc wrapped in a bow, but it was a beginning. Helen had feared the worst: termination, disgrace, isolation. Instead, she'd been given something more difficult and far more meaningful: a chance to change. She knew it wouldn't be easy. The work ahead, sensitivity training, community outreach, honest self-reflection, would require her to break down the walls she'd built over years of pride and habit. But for the first time, Helen didn't flinch from that challenge. She welcomed it. Because this time, she understood. Real growth demands vulnerability, and vulnerability takes courage. And so, with quiet resolve, she walked away from the building. not as the person she had been, but as someone trying to become better. In the weeks that followed, Leah and Noah Carter slowly returned to their normal lives. School, sports, hanging out with friends. At first, those routines felt like distractions, an attempt to bury what had happened on that flight. But as time passed, something unexpected emerged. Leah noticed she was different, more aware, more thoughtful, more awake to the quiet injustices around her. She began noticing how quickly people sized others up, how often someone's appearance led to assumptions. Comments she once would have brushed off now echoed in her mind, heavy with new meaning. One afternoon, Leah sat in the school cafeteria, surrounded by her usual group of friends. Laughter bounced around the table, but she found herself quiet, her thoughts elsewhere. Her friend Sophia, always observant, leaned in with a gentle voice. "Hey, Leah, you've seemed quiet lately. Is everything okay?" Leah looked up, meeting Sophia's kind eyes. She hesitated. Should she say something? Would they understand? Finally, she decided to speak. "I've just been thinking a lot lately," she said softly, "about how people treat each other, about how fast we judge, and how it can really hurt someone." Sophia nodded slowly, her expression changing. "Is this about what happened on your flight?" Leah gave a small nod. "Yeah. It made me realize how easy it is to hurt someone just by assuming the wrong thing. It happens more than we think." Sophia placed a comforting hand on her arm. "That's really brave of you to talk about, Leah. I think more people need to hear that." As Leah sat at the lunch table with her friends, the room seemed to fade around her. "It's strange," she said thoughtfully, "how quickly people judge, without even knowing someone." Sophia nodded, gently understanding. "You mean, like what happened on your flight?" Leah nodded. "Yeah, it made me realize how easily people can hurt each other without meaning to. I never saw it so clearly until then." Sophia rested a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I think a lot of people do it, without realizing it, but maybe now, because of what happened to you, people will start to notice more." Leah smiled softly, her heart warming from Sophia's kindness. Just then, a voice joined the quiet conversation. Leah turned and saw Ethan, a classmate she recognized but didn't know well. He spoke carefully, but sincerely. "I overheard you talking," he said. "I just wanted to say, I'm really sorry that happened to you and your brother. It's not fair. I've seen stuff like that before, but I guess I never really thought about it." His words surprised Leah, but they touched her deeply. "Thank you for saying that," she said gently. "It helps, knowing people actually care." Ethan nodded. "I think it's important we talk about these things. It shouldn't be normal to treat people differently based on how they look or where they sit on a plane." Around them, other students listened quietly, absorbing more than they let on. It was small, but it was something. That evening, Leah shared the story with her father. He listened closely, clearly moved. "I'm proud of you, Leah," he said warmly, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You're helping people understand something important. Change happens one person at a time, and sometimes it starts with conversations just like that." Leah smiled quietly, a sense of purpose settling into her heart. Across town, Helen Draper sat in a circle during a community-based training session, surrounded by strangers, but connected by truth. For weeks, she had attended workshops and courses, each one forcing her to confront the things she once ignored. The stories she heard were painful, raw. At first, she wanted to defend herself, But now, she only listened. She no longer wanted to justify. She wanted to understand. That night, when it came time to speak, Helen hesitated, but then found the strength. "I made a terrible mistake," she said, voice low and steady. "I assumed 2 young passengers didn't belong in first class because of how they looked. I embarrassed them. I hurt them. At the time, I didn't fully understand how harmful my actions were. But now I do." She looked around the room, her eyes soft but honest. "These sessions have opened my eyes, and I'm committed to never making that kind of assumption again." The room was quiet, but the air was full of something powerful. Not judgment, but understanding. In the months that followed, the airline implemented real change. Mandatory training for all staff, open dialogue forums, and stronger accountability. Helen, no longer just an employee, became part of the solution, sharing her story with new recruits, reminding them that professionalism must never come at the cost of compassion. Leah, now a quiet voice of awareness among her peers, continued to speak up, not with anger, but with clarity and courage. Her experience had not just changed her, it had helped others see. And though Leah and Helen never spoke again, their lives were forever intertwined by that one flight, 2 people on opposite ends of a painful moment, both changed by it in ways that would echo long after the seatbelt signs had dimmed. As Helen Draper sat in the community circle, surrounded by voices and stories far bigger than her own, she finally understood. True accountability wasn't about punishment. It was about humility, action, and a deep willingness to become someone better. When it was her turn to speak, she did so without excuses. "I made a terrible mistake," she said quietly, eyes lowered but voice steady. "I judged 2 children who didn't look like I thought first-class passengers should, and I hurt them deeply. I know now how wrong that was." There was silence, not the cold kind, but the kind that made space for truth. Then an older woman across the circle, Grace, spoke gently, her voice warm with wisdom. "Helen, it takes courage to admit mistakes honestly. Change is never easy, but it is always possible. What matters is what you do next, how you grow, and how you help others grow." Helen nodded, feeling a surprising swell of emotion. Grace's words weren't just comforting, they were a call, a reminder that she wasn't alone, and that her path, while difficult, had purpose. In the weeks that followed, Helen threw herself into the work. She volunteered regularly with programs focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. She listened more than she spoke. She helped mentor new flight attendants, reminding them that respect isn't a formality, it's a foundation. Slowly, people in the community began to see something shift in her. Not perfection, not a polished redemption, but real change, the kind built over time, through consistent effort and genuine care. Though still unsure of what her future held at the airline, Helen now found meaning in the work itself, and that gave her a sense of peace. Meanwhile, Leah continued having honest conversations with classmates, teachers, and even people online. She spoke softly but with purpose, about fairness, about dignity, about the danger of assumptions. With every conversation, she realized something profound. One painful experience, if faced with courage, could ripple outward and help others grow. Though Leah and Helen's paths never crossed again, they remained quietly connected by that moment in time. 2 lives forever shaped by a single misunderstanding, and by the hard, brave work it took to grow beyond it. Months passed. The airline introduced sweeping changes. mandatory training on bias and respectful communication, internal forms for staff to speak up and reflect, leadership teams holding themselves accountable, not just in word, but in practice. Passengers noticed, and slowly, trust began to rebuild. Helen completed her required programs with humility, earning praise from instructors and volunteers. She returned to airline headquarters, not as someone hoping to regain a title, but as someone ready to serve with integrity. Rebecca Morris and Jonathan Reed welcomed her back, not just as an employee, but as a changed person. Her reinstatement came with clear conditions, but Helen accepted them gladly, because this time it wasn't about status, it was about purpose. Back at school, Leah's voice began reaching even further. She helped start a student initiative focused on fairness and empathy. She even gave a quiet presentation to her school's faculty, using her own experience not to shame, but to illuminate. "This wasn't just about what happened to me," she said. "It's about how easily it can happen to anyone, and how we all can do better." And people listened. Nearly a year after that life-changing flight, the airport felt different to Mia, not because of the lights or the crowds or even the destination ahead, but because of what she carried within her, a sense of awareness she hadn't had before. She walked confidently alongside Elijah and their father, not just as a passenger, but as someone who had changed something and been changed in return. At the check-in counter, the staff greeted them not with pity, but with warmth and sincerity. There was no tension, no forced politeness, just respect. On board, every interaction felt different too, more thoughtful, more human. Every smile, every word seemed shaped by a culture that had clearly grown since that day. As they settled into their seats, Elijah looked out the window, wide-eyed with excitement. But this time, it wasn't his first time in first class that thrilled him. It was the feeling that this flight, this airline, was a place he truly belonged. From the corner of her eye, Mia saw someone moving quietly down the aisle. She turned. It was her, Helen Draper. Her posture was different now, gentler, not from defeat but from humility. She stopped near their row, clearly unsure whether she should speak but also clearly wanting to. Mia met her eyes and gave a small nod. Helen's voice was calm and steady, but low enough to be just for them. "I've spent the last year learning what I should have understood all along. I hope I carry that lesson into every day for the rest of my life." She didn't linger. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply spoke with respect, then moved on, her presence quiet but meaningful. And Mia? She didn't say much in return. She didn't need to. She simply looked over at her brother and reached for his hand, offering the same kind of quiet reassurance she had given him on the worst day of their lives. This time, though, the air was lighter. Their father looked on with quiet pride, not just because they were strong, but because they had become thoughtful, compassionate, and aware of the world in a way many never learn. As the plane lifted off and the clouds stretched endlessly outside the window, Mia stared ahead, not with fear or even sadness, but with a sense of calm clarity. She understood now. Life wouldn't always be fair. People would make mistakes. But what mattered most was how we responded, and how we helped others do better too. In that moment, she didn't need closure. She didn't need an apology etched in stone. She had something more powerful: growth, perspective, and a heart that chose to stay open even after being hurt.